this week in Boston is at Berklee College of Music, and also at the new school in Cambridge we had the Lennie Tristano Centennial, which was a 100th year celebration of his birth. We have lectures and concerts, and it's a real great, and I think to me meaningful validation of everything he was doing. I'd like to introduce the Venerable Harvey Diamond. Woo! Harvey was a fellow student of mine with Lennie Tristano way back in the day, and we thought we'd like to share some stories of Lennie and reminiscences, maybe a little bit about his piano teaching.
Absolutely.
For those of you that don't know, Lennie was one of the great jazz pianists of all time, and he lived from 1919 until 1978, and had a very active teaching studio in Hollis, Queens. Because the great thing about Lennie, again, is he had this real curriculum for piano. And although he wouldn't follow it exactly with everybody, he was taking into account the total musician. And he wanted to create a musician that had a strong foundation of technique and ear training and theory. He wanted to give you the whole package. So you couldn't leave from a lesson without having specific exercises. You walked into his studio, he was sitting usually on like a kind of a, what would you call it, like a recliner kind of a thing?
I think so. I remember that's what it was
like. A sofa recliner thing? Kind of at the end of the room. He had a Baldwin piano in his teaching studio. And he had basically two different types of things, maybe three, that he would do as a lesson. One of the things about Lennie that was so fantastic and why he was such a successful teacher is that he was one of the first people that came up with the pedagogy for teaching jazz. And he, of course, he worked with each person separately and differently because everyone's an individual.
Exactly right.
But he did have an approach to teaching where he gave the student subjects to learn. So it was not at all random. There was basically technique to do. There was voicing, some kind of theory.
Absolutely.
Playing on tunes, improvising, arranging chords in the left hand.
Yes.
And then always you couldn't leave without singing a record.
Right. I always felt like, look, he was out to help you play and get out whatever music was inside you as an individual. Absolutely. Even though there was specific stuff to work on.
So the pedagogy was you would learn the pieces of the puzzle, and then you got a chance to put the puzzle together in the way that you wanted.
Exactly right. It was like covering everything that goes into playing without saying what to play and how to do it.
Right, and that was amazing.
Which is beautiful because that brings out one's own individuality in their playing, which I would say that's what jazz is about.
Sure. In 7 years of studying with him, he never told me what note to play.
Beautiful, man. I could mean.
Right? He never talked about chord scales. Or
never.
Nothing.
Never.
And that was just unusual. It worked somehow. I don't know how.
Yeah, never a word about
but
that.
Somehow you didn't need
it. Absolutely.
So we have the technique, we have the theory, we have the ear training. Then once you got into improvising, that was a whole nother trip.
First thing were the scales with different combinations of fingers.
Right.
And even though I've been playing the piano since I'm 5 years old.
Right.
But I was knocked out with it all. So the first thing was doing scales with different combinations of fingers. 1, 2.
Right. 1, 2.
4, 5.
4, 5. So this means that you had to play a scale. Were you doing contrary motion?
I first started out each hand alone.
Each hand alone.
Alone and slow.
Oh, baby, slow.
With the metronome.
With the metronome.
Slow.
That's a controversial subject right there.
Right.
But Lennie was definitely into using the metronome.
Yes.
Not as a crutch, but as a device to strengthen your time.
Exactly right. And so 1, 2, 4,
1,
5.
2, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
3, 4, 5.
3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Perfect.
3, 4, 5, 4, 5.
Exactly.
And then the fingering you normally learn when you go study the piano.
And the traditional classical.
Regular classical fingering.
And so, Harvey, you start off with one hand. He started off contrary.
And left hand down.
Left hand down.
Down. Right.
Right.
And back.
And then...
With 1, 2, out and back.
Right.
4, 5, just out.
Right.
1, 2, 3, out and back.
Right.
3, 4, 5, just out. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, out and back. 3, 4, 5, 4, 5.
Beautiful.
Just out.
Exactly.
Classical fingering.
And then that was just that would be in straight time, equal time. Then he put you through the timings.
I think the important thing too. I think one thing he mentioned was to make sure that you bottom out the note.
Now tell me about this.
No, this was. I mean, you can't go further than when the note goes down because you start to hurt your arm. But to get to the bottom of each note.
See, I never heard this from him.
It was called bottoming out the note.
Bottoming out the note.
Making sure you got to the bottom of each note.
Now, did he want you to do that with every note you played?
Every note you played, man.
Wow.
Yeah, with the scale, getting to the bottom of. The other thing was when you were playing on the white notes, because when you're playing the white notes, you can take it towards the outside of the key.
Right.
So that you take it as close to the black keys as possible. Right. Because when you're improvising, so you have all those notes under your fingers, because improvising is going by in a split second, that just the time, if you're on the outside of the white note, going to a black note, you might get hung up.
Beautiful.
So you be in as close to the black notes as possible. And the other great thing about that is, that I discovered in doing this was, when you got into chords, being right in there, man, in between
the black keys.
Yeah, being inside there gave you a different feeling and a different contact with your fingers in some way.
I felt a lot like what he was doing with the fingering was breaking the traditional classical fingering.
Oh, totally.
So
well, because with 4/5,
right? The 4. I mean, you just
in
playing like this.
classical fingering,
Like goes like this: 4, 5, 4, 5, and slow.
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 But well, the thing is, with classical fingering, your thumb and your fifth finger are never on a black note.
Right.
So he was trying to.
Right. He was trying to break the thumb and the pinky thing.
Get on the other side of that, but also I think you could say he was trying to get you so that. Getting loose enough so you could play with any hand, with any finger, whatever that you heard.
So I did exactly the same exercise that Harvey did. We started off with the 1, 2, 4, 5.
Right.
We went up a contrary motion.
Contrary motion.
And then it was, you changed the timing. So instead of just going bum, beam, bum, beam, bum,
two
beam.
Against one.
2 against 1.
3 against 1.
3 against
4
1.
Against 1.
4 against 1.
3 against 2.
3. Then you get into 3 against 2. So you're doing this 4 and 5 fingering. Maybe you're playing an A flat harmonic minor,
right?
And the right hand's going in 3, and the left hand's going in 2 or 4 or 5,
right?
And you had to keep it all together with 2 fingers and do it at like 40 on the metronome.
Exactly.
And
right.
we did this for years.
That's right.
And the exercise that he gave me was 5 years long.
Somebody who was studying with me said he figured out that. Wherever this is at, he figured it out that he went through the scales every week. Right. Everything that you were supposed to do would take 8 years.
8 years, okay.
Yeah, he just came back and said 8 years.
Yes.
It's like we were talking about the chord voices, the left-handed ones.
So I finished 5 years, right? So for me, it was a 5-year program.
Okay.
And I mean, this was every day. We were kids. I was 16, 17. That's how old we were. And you'd be sitting in your attic or in your basement and playing the piano with 2 fingers and going in timings, and you do this for years, 5 years. So finally I go to his house and it's like, we're done, because I knew where it was done. Right. And so I said, man, we're done. wow, thank God. And he goes,
No way.
now we're going to do it all again
Yeah.
without the metronome. And that was the only time I ever said no to him.
Right.
I said, I'm not going to do that, man.
That's
Come on,
great,
please. And he laughed his ass off.
That's great.
He laughed. His sense of humor was spectacular.
That's too funny. Well, obviously, the sound that you were getting from each note was important.
Mm-hmm.
Nice, even sound.
Even sound.
Yeah,
So the task to a certain degree was to get an even sound from uneven fingers.
Well, he told me once that when he first heard Bud Powell play live, that it helped him realize in his own teaching that you could express a feeling with your fingers.
Right.
Which, when you really think about that, whoever thinks about that, I never heard that.
I mean, that was that was probably the most common word in his vocabulary when he was teaching was feeling, right?
Right.
And a lot of people called him cold and unemotional, but that wasn't it at all. Well, the first thing inevitably he would give most piano players were these lists of chord voicings. And this is for the left hand.
Possibilities, right?
Right.
Your left hand.
So he had an ingenious way of doing it where he had you study the possibilities for a certain family of
And it was
chords.
really organized.
Really organized. So
Yeah.
major sevenths, and there were at least 20 or 30. He would have you play lists of chords, 1, 3, 7, and he would call them out from across the room. 1, 3, 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. And you would do this in every key, and you
Right.
just listen to it, right?
Right.
And then it would be 2, 3, 5, and it was a
Exactly.
long listen. There was many more than I'm saying. 2, 3, 5, 1. I mean, it really was like every possibility.
Right.
And for the dominant, so you would study one family of chords, major seventh, let's say,
Right.
and you might take weeks going through all the keys,
Minor
right?
7, flat 5.
Yeah.
Tonic minor chords.
The dominant list,
2 million of them.
there were over 100.
Yeah.
One whole entire lesson of 30 minutes was him calling out numbers of dominant seventh chords.
Yeah. There were loads of them.
It was over 100, and we had to do them in every key.
And in major,
Man.
melodic minor, jazz minor, and harp.
It was unbelievable.
Well, no, that was the diatonic thing. I
Yeah.
take that back.
Right.
This was just the
Right. So the chord list,
Yeah.
he had you do like major sevenths, and he had a list of those.
Right.
Major 7, minor 6,
Yeah,
minor 7,
major 7, minor 7, minor 7,
minor 7, flat 5,
tonic minor chords,
Okay.
which are minor majors.
Minor majors.
And then dominant sevenths.
dominants.
Yeah, dominant.
Yeah, and these were lists of possibilities, and
And then you'd find your own.
right, and then as soon as he would finish giving you these lists of possibilities, you would start arranging. And that was a beautiful way to do it because he gave you all these possibilities. It's like you were Monet in the lilies, and you had your palette of colors, and he gave you the palette of colors with just trillions of them, and then you choose which ones to use.
Exactly.
And you make arrangements. And I remember the thing that he wanted us to do most of the time.
Keep the thumb on top.
Keep the thumb like within a
Well,
step,
it felt like you could
or-
get something melodic
Yes.
happening right within the chord voice.
Right.
Just to have that awareness.
Right. So he called it having a counter line in the thumb of the left hand.
Exactly right.
And so you'd have the two melodies, and if you hear on his recordings, it's very clear that he's doing this.
Yep.
And he has this real slow moving, usually, melody in the left thumb, and that was set intentionally against the faster moving line. And it was beautiful.
The thumb was on top of those chords. And the other thing I recall at least was making sure that you could arpeggiate, obviously, the ones that were hard to reach.
Right.
But ones that weren't, you wanted to make sure that you struck all the notes together.
All the notes together. Now, did he say to you something like, something like this, like you wanted to go, like land on the chord?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and that I had never heard before, because I had studied with someone in San Francisco who was really good. Physical relaxation.
Physical relaxation.
Yeah, that getting loose as possible. And if you get to that with that kind of work, then it's just like you transfer it over into your playing. If you get what that looseness feels like,
Right.
you can't force it.
Right.
But if you can keep the feeling in the back of your brain, then you can perhaps bring it through when you play.
Right. Now I remember a lesson also where he went through the whole thing, how to sit, right?
Yeah, oh yeah,
Like
that, my
sitting,
very
like
first
this,
lesson was how
and he
to
had a
sit.
whole thing, right?
Right.
And he would kind of like, he would at times when he was describing the physical posture, he would came over to me and kind of like got on top of me, and just kind of showed me how to do
He hit the
it.
hell out of me on my backwards.
Yeah.
No, because you were supposed to sit up, which of course I don't do now at
Right.
all. But back then I remember being bent over
Yes.
doing it, man, and he came over to me and he went,
Oh, beautiful.
right in the middle of my back.
Oh, that's
I've
great.
always remembered that, man. He
Wow.
made his way over and did that.
So we have the technique. That was one aspect of what he taught us with the scales.
Yeah, okay.
And we had
Scale,
the theory with the chords, with the
chord.
formations and the voicings, and then he got into two-hand chords, right?
Right, got into doing the chords diatomically, starting with triads,
Right.
major, melodic minor, harmonic minor.
Right.
From there, seventh chords, all closed position, major
Right.
in the minor.
Right.
Then we got to open position with two-handed chords through sevenths, ninths, 11ths, and 13ths.
Right.
And then we'd start to put those together with tunes.
Right. So he gave you the material first, for example, one-hand chords, and then he had you use the materials you had studied to create something.
Exactly right.
And then he would go on to the next level of materials, give you that, and then you would create something with that. And he would give me exercises where I had to improvise with one finger.
You got it.
You did those?
Yeah.
Did you? I went through the whole hand.
Yeah. Thumb,
Yeah.
second finger, third
Yeah.
finger.
You have to
and
improvise
then
a whole
with the
piece like
hand.
this, and then he would go to the left hand, and you'd have to improvise a whole. Finally, you'd be improvising on Pennies from Heaven at about 40 on the metronome with only the pinky.
Yeah, right. That's so cool.
Oh man. And we did this for years.
Yeah.
So when you were improvising, he had his own way of speeding. So a lot of, as you got further into the playing, it was about being able to do what you could do faster. That was one aspect. So the metronome really was important there. So he had me going from the bottom of the metronome.
Top,
You
right.
play, and even if you're using all your fingers, bottom of the metronome, one chorus at 40, one chorus at 42, one chorus at
Yeah, right.
44, all the way up to
yeah.
208.
Exactly. And back.
And then back.
Exactly. Beautiful, man.
Man,
Right out.
Jesus. So you have the complete pedagogy, and that's, I think that's one of his greatest legacies among the tremendous list of accomplishments that he made in his life.
I agree with you.
And the last thing was the singing with records, right? You couldn't
Right,
leave without
singing
singing
with
with records.
Besides the idea that you could express a feeling with your fingers, he did tell me this, that he felt like when he heard Bud Powell live, that it helped him realize in his own teaching the sound that you get from the piano, and it changed one aspect of how you did the scales. And he also told me that this he felt was the greatest thing that he had ever put together out of everything that he put together. And what that was that you kept your, and I'll show you on the piano in a second,
Sure.
that you kept your arm and your wrist totally still,
Still.
and you just did it with your fingers. So say you're doing C major with 1, 2, and your hand was a little bit above the keyboard.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Good boy, Harvey. I hit B and C. Okay, here we go.
So you're hitting it with the finger.
This is not moving.
Now, did he want you to play that way all the time?
No, but he told me, and this has happened to me too, is that as time went on, he was playing more flat fingers.
He was playing more flat.
Yeah, but not necessarily that way.
Yeah.
But this would, say you would, I got something else with the scales too. So this. You gotta do it slow because you gotta make sure you're raising each finger.
Now, this was a specific exercise? That
Absolutely.
Okay, I didn't get
with
this.
all the scales.
Yeah.
Same way in all the fingerings.
Okay.
So 3 third finger,
Wow.
4th finger,
Unbelievable.
5. And that's how we did it. So you're just using your fingers.
Wow.
Nothing else. Your arm's not happening.
Right.
So did we talk about also the articulations in the scales? So you start out, so now we're going to use our whole hand. So you first start articulating 2 notes. So you're preparing the next 2 with your mind.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
When you get to the note you're going to, be cool.
I didn't do this, yeah.
Prepare the next 2. Prepare the next 2.
Uh-huh. And so this is an exercise in group of 2.
That's right. And then we worked all the way through doing that with all 7 notes. You did 2.
So you did groups of 3.
Each hand alone. Then,
Groups of
and then
4.
First note you just strike.
Ah. Amazing.
And we did that through 7 notes, left hand down and back.
Oh, amazing.
Same finger.
So that would kind of get you thinking more phrasing and more
Phrasing, and
like
I think get you
a flow of
looser,
notes.
extending the line.
Beautiful.
I mean, the idea, right, for him was to get it to the point where our fingers wouldn't hang us up or get in the way, get loose enough,
Right.
so we could better play whatever it is that we heard. But the Bud Powell thing on,
Yeah,
and
that
we did the
changes,
same
right?
thing, what I just did, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6,
Right.
we did that same way. 2 notes. Three notes, just your fingers.
Jeez.
Make your fingers feel unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Right, and also gets to your sound.
Right.
Gets to your sound
Right.
if you do it enough. So we did that with all the scale fingers.
Right. A lot of times people ask in jazz, if you want to study jazz piano or be a jazz pianist, do you have to play classical music?
Oh, beautiful.
Now,
He said no.
Yeah. Now his feeling was you didn't have to play classical music to get the technical facility, but you did have to study technique.
Yes.
You had to work on the mechanism, but it didn't have to be through classical.
But I also think he felt like there was no. I can remember when I was doing some teaching at a college, the technical aspect and the pieces were always separate. People would say, I have to go practice my technique. Or they'd say, now I have to go practice Brahms or Chopin.
Yeah.
But I think in playing jazz, it's all one.
It's all.
We're talking about the chord voicings and putting them together with melodies. Whereas you came up with different notes that you think wouldn't go together started to sound right after you play them enough.
And you had the freedom to go where you're told you
Exactly
where you wanted to go.
And that would influence what you played on top of it.
Right.
That would open that up for you.
Right.
I agree.
And so we invite you to listen to Lennie's music. Contact either of us if you want. And thank you for tuning in. Blessings and keep swinging. Yeah, from Boston.